Hello again, everybody. Thanks for joining me on this journey of talking about my life and awakening and all the things that have transpired since that event that I described in the first podcast. In the first podcast, I was basically telling the story of my life, my upbringing, sort of the path that led me to that moment where everything changed really in the flash of a single moment. And if you haven't listened to the first one, that might help to give you a little bit of additional context for what I describe in this second one. But basically, after that moment, and it was a momentary, instantaneous shift in my consciousness and my way to experience this life. After that moment and after that first experience, life continues. And I know for myself, at that time, I didn't have any spiritual friends, overtly spiritual friends. And I was not part of any intentional communities or had any sort of recommended daily practices. I was living my life to fulfill this story of achievement through a job and a role and relationships. And so after that moment, I had to really accept the fact. I had to surrender and to accept the fact that I no longer understood fully who or what I was. And when I say that, I wouldn't describe that at any level of psychosis in the sense that, as I mentioned previously, I knew my name, I knew my life history, I knew my address, my social security number. But everything that would have been a story that created me as a person, which also oftentimes related to my preferences, how I like to spend my time, how I didn't like to spend my time, what would actually bring me joy, which was never even a truly an active consideration before that moment, and what would bring me displeasure and unhappiness. And so a large number of my previous behaviors, regardless of whether or not I knew it, did not bring me happiness. They were often in the pursuit of something else in the future, whether that was a future vision of, having freedom through money or peace through possessions, or owning certain relationships and people and how they would make me feel and what that meant for me. And after that moment, I could feel things in my body for the first time. So I would say that before that experience, most of my rationalization of making decisions throughout the day, how do I prioritize my time, how do I live my life, I would say most of that was a mental exercise. And most of those mental decisions were affected by all sorts of stories and beliefs that I had been fed and accepted and built up over time. That would be like the filter through which those stories and decisions would be made to then basically create my life. So this, for the first time, was not a mental experience. This was not in my mind. This was an ephemeral, deep understanding of intuition. This was, for the first time, being able to later articulate it clearly as living through my heart instead of my mind. And not the heart as just an emotional thing, but heart as its own kind of intelligence, its own innate kind of wisdom. And the best way I can describe it is that for the first time in my life, when I would start to either have a thought or a movement towards something that was not aligned with my soul, I could feel it immediately, instantaneously in my body as a pulse of negative and oftentimes painful energy. And that wasn't me thinking and making a judgment on that. That was just an intuitive knowingness, like this is no longer aligned for you. This is no longer the truth of where or how you should spend your time. And this is no longer a relationship that is based on truth. And so whenever I would start to combine my thoughts with my experience, there was this new barometer, this new guiding energy that was an awareness of the wisdom and the knowledge of the heart, as I mentioned previously. And so before that moment, I would have told you that I experienced the world through thoughts. And as I would have the thoughts, the next step would be in relation to those series of thoughts that I might feel emotions in my body. For the first time ever, I would say the sequence of those things started to change, where intuitively I could feel and know what was aligned for me and what was not aligned for me before I would even have laggard thoughts to try to, quote unquote, make a decision about that. And so when we start to think about and talk about intuition, I would best describe it for myself as an experience of inner guidance that is often an impulse that can precede your thinking mind. So oftentimes we think that we are making decisions and everything comes from the mind and then the body follows. And I would say that now my experience is that the knowledge held within my body is what leads. And the thoughts are the things that follow that intuition that comes from the body and comes from the heart. And so when you think about what we call somatic practices, soma meaning the body, I didn't have any idea or direct experience of what that really meant. I don't think I really understood that my body and the wisdom that my body holds through my heart could in fact lead my life, and that my thinking mind secondarily could be used as something to protect me from immediate danger and for me to refine the direction that I was already starting to head into and to flow with from somewhere that didn't come from the mind. And so when you start to think about and hear about spiritual practices, a lot of times the topic of surrender will start to come up. And if you're unfamiliar with the experience of surrender or the topic of surrender, the Western characterization of surrendering is kind of this dual notion that there is the person or the thing that's surrendering, and there is the person or thing they're surrendering to. So it's like this dualistic thing that one is subservient to another. There's a dominant and a passive. And that couldn't be further from the truth of my experience and most people who have shared about it related to spiritual path. I would say that the process of surrendering is surrendering to the greater knowledge, the collective understanding of the wisdom of the universe. And that my body and my mind as this experience is one single fragmentation of something that is much greater and completely connected. And so when we start to talk about surrendering, the act of the surrender is not a mental thing at all. The act of surrender is to acknowledge that there is a flow with life that can guide your energy and your actions and your time, that is innately already happening unless you try to get it to deviate from that course. And you do that with your mind. So your mind can either help you as a refinement tool to attune to your deeper purpose and to flow with life in a cleaner, easier way, or it can be used as a destructive distraction to pull you out of what is already naturally happening. There's already a calling, there's already a purpose, there's already a meaning in this particular lifetime that you're living. You don't have to create that, and you don't have to find it through your mind. The way to get to that deeper truth is, in fact, to surrender to what's already unfolding and what's already happening. But to do that, you have to be able to listen and to let go of other distractions and things that would block the flow of that truth for yourself. And so after that moment, I would say for the first time ever, I didn't know who I was, in the sense that I stopped using the false direction of the mind that had created an ego that was trying to serve itself through stories and through accolades and all the things that we've talked about. And for the first time, without that structure being the predominant guiding force, it suddenly opened up all this stuff. It was like it was always there. It was just covered by this nonsense of distraction and chaos and desires. And without me doing it, through that experience, that layer of distractive nonsense was just not there anymore. It didn't exist. I don't know why, I don't know how, but it didn't exist. And so what was left under that layer was truth in my heart and knowledge that could be felt within my body. And so somatic wisdom and surrender are very important components of unfolding your spiritual path and your journey. And there's many different tools and practices and ways to be able to surrender to something greater than quote unquote yourself. But you have to start by accepting the fact that the surrender is not something that you as an entity are surrendering to. You have to accept the fact that you are greater than the small self that you've always believed yourself to be. And so, in fact, you're surrendering to the truth that you're greater than the smaller stories have tricked you into believing that you are what you are. So after that experience, I had to discover what was the truth of what can truly make me happy, not because I saw an advertisement or someone told me or I got advice. When they say follow your heart, that doesn't mean follow the passion of your mind, of what you think you would like to do. That's just tracing more dreams that are sort of a facade of real directional truth. Follow your heart means to not try, to not create another layer of distraction and nonsense. Like, don't go searching for your purpose. You are your purpose. The fact that you exist is the purpose. And so by getting quiet and getting into somatic intelligence in your body, once that distractive layer is gone, suddenly, as you open up this energy field, which is in fact what your body is, this is not manifestation in a popularized way where it's like, I want these things, and if I think about them using my mind, I would create the fulfillment of my desires. Actually, it's the exact opposite of that. It is, once I am quiet and I stop pretending and playing the game that my mind is in fact controlling everything, that I am controlling everything. Whenever I decide to surrender, which means to stop playing that game, there's a new layer of energy that automatically is directing everything in your life. It's calling everything into your life. It's dispersing everything into your life, from your life, that's not aligned. And the interesting and beautiful part is that you don't have to do it. And the more that you are doing it or trying to do it, in fact, you're getting back just into spiritual materialism, and you're just creating new ways of characterizing the same old games you always have. You know, you're going to achieve something of a spiritual nature. Couldn't be further from the truth of surrender to something greater than yourself, the perfection of the universe, the perfection of this moment. And what that meant for me in a pragmatic way, from a day-to-day perspective, was that, as I mentioned, I think in the first podcast, when I came downstairs from having that experience, I could only start to go through my day. I wasn't going to verbalize or share anything that had happened because I myself didn't feel like I knew what had happened. I knew it was something of a cataclysmic nature, and I knew it was something of a divine nature. But for me to pretend that I could have explained that in words or conveyed that to any other person at that time would have been a complete and total lie. And so I was just going to continue to go throughout the day and to go forward to see who and what I was, as a being. And when I walked downstairs for lunch and my mom asked me, would you like a turkey sandwich? In that moment, it's really important. When I said, no, I don't feel like eating meat today, that response didn't come from my mind. There was no thinking process involved. There was no me thinking about my desires. What do I want for lunch? What do I not want for lunch? There was no ethical lens upon it. There was no, it's bad to do this, it's good to do that. None of that existed. That use of words and vibration that came out of my mouth as a sentence came from a deeper place that was not my rational mind. And as much as you're observing this and listening now, I had the experience that I was listening and observing to something outside of my egoic mental self communicating. And the simple answer was, I don't feel like eating meat today. And I never have touched another piece of meat since then, and it's been over 5 years. And if you'd asked me before that moment, would I have been vegetarian, much less vegan, I would have told you before that, sure, directionally it sounds like it'd be good for my health. I am capable of reading all the studies around climate and knowing all the effects that's happening. I can drive down a highway and see these animals suffering in the back of a truck. I could have all those things, and yet it still wasn't a priority for me. I don't know why. In retrospect, it's hard for me to say. But it wasn't my experience at that time. It's not a judgmental thing. It's sharing that even with access to that information, even with that understanding in my mind and me seeing that pain, it was not something that I felt particularly called to act on or change my life. And it might have been a doubt that I couldn't change my life in that way. So at that moment, I would not have told you that it was in my top 100 or 500 priorities to do that. I would have said, sure, it would be great for my health, but it's not something that I feel like I'm capable of doing or I'm going to prioritize the time. And so that was never hard. I've never craved a cheeseburger in that way. I've never missed, there was never a desire to eat meat. And I don't look down on anyone who does, and that's critical. There's no proselytizing to say that you should or shouldn't do anything, because I don't feel that your direct experience should be affected by my desire to change it in that way. And some people may agree or disagree with that, but my experience is that everything is perfect. My like and dislike and my perception of suffering and my perception with my role in experiencing and affecting suffering is completely unique to me, and it's completely unique to you, and it's completely unique to every miracle of every being that's alive. With that as an example around meat and veganism, my life was like that for every facet. So I didn't know what I was vibrationally attuned to eat or not eat until I was in the situation to experience that. And then whatever came out of me naturally. And it was my true preference aligned with my soul and my heart. And so the same thing happened with how I would use my free time, how I'd spend time with certain groups of people or not. There was never a ethical, moral judgment on groups of people or friends or anything like that. If I tried to pretend, as I was previously, although I couldn't realize it, if I tried to pretend that I was authentically connecting with people and I wasn't, the difference would be that it would be painful in my body. And I'm not talking about stress coming from social anxiety. No. This was different. This was you are connected with deeper truths within yourself, and your mind is now aligned with your heart. They're not separate. And so with that connection that's now made and is clear, there can no longer be games of pretending like you don't know. And if I approached any kind of misalignment in any way, the result would be strong physical pain in my body. And that was just the truth of the situation. It's the truth of the situation now. And so in some ways it sounds amazing because it's like, oh, wow, gosh, if I could feel truth all the time and I would know in my body. And in other ways it was hard because a lot of those patterns and behaviors, I had told myself the story that had stacked my life and constructed my life in a certain way that it created certain securities and it created certain patterns that I knew if I do certain things at a certain way at a certain time, again, I'll get cookies, I'll get rewarded, whether that's by words or by money or by accolades, whatever it is, right? We're just constantly chasing that cult really of recognition. Like as long as we all keep telling each other the same things, that we're good people if we do these things, even if we inherently kind of know that maybe the patterns are unhealthy or they're not aligned with the greater health of the earth or peace or prosperity, whatever it might be, as long as we just keep saying that this is the way that it has to be, it needs to be, and as long as we continue to avoid pain and suffering of any form, then we're good, right? We're good. That's kind of oftentimes the truth of how many facets and groups within human society operate. And so it really I had to rediscover what I loved more so. I could feel instantaneously what was no longer aligned on previous social behaviors and, spending times with a group of people that were inauthentic. And that wasn't just social life. That was also heavily oriented toward business. So, there are some people in business who I love, and there are many people in business who I didn't love. And in fact, I couldn't stand to be in their presence or their company. But I had to play the role that I did. And I guess that's what you might think that you call a job, or you might say that you have to do that for an achievement, And the reality is that truth is truth and untruth is untruth. And for me, from that time forward, untruth was no longer something that I could play, that I could be or I could tolerate. Not ethical, not moral, just pure direct experience alignment with what I would feel as my experience from my heart and my intuition throughout my entire body. So as an example, right after that experience, I soon realized that I could not continue to have business meetings and do presentations that were not completely truthful and completely aligned with not just the information on a slide, but my desire to spend my life energy representing certain things or solving problems that I had previously pretended were important to myself or to the world. And I think that many of us probably face that. Like, there's like things that we do with our life that we know are bad. Like we can clearly see, we're like, oh, okay, what I'm doing is bad. It's wrong. It's hurting other beings. It's hurting the world. It's creating hate. That's one category. And there's another category that's much more pervasive that I think the majority of us fall into, which is we know that we're spending our life energy and our time, the soul in this body on this earth, we're spending our precious time on something that we know is not truthfully important. We know that it is not truthfully who we are, and we know it is not the truth of the greatest offering that we need to be existing as in this lifetime, in this experience. And the second category is much easier to pretend, because as long as you're not the bad guy, definitively black and white, the bad guy, The second category is what kills the soul. It's a slow death of the soul. That's the one that you hear about all the time. And so that slow death of the soul of something that we know is not categorically bad, but we also know is completely not the purpose of having a life and is not aligned with the fulfillment of what we can be and what we can do and what we are here to learn. That's the one that drives most desire. And so as we feel that subtle pain, that's when we go to great lengths to acquire things. We're always trying to numb that ongoing subtle pain, that subtle discomfort that's pervasive, that won't go away. And we think maybe we go jump to another company. Maybe if we get promoted to that role, maybe if I do this, but I just don't do that kind of project. I'll do this kind of work, but I won't work with that kind of person. But we still stay in the same universe. That, I would say, is the most pervasive disease that we face collectively. Yeah, because it is that long-term dullness that we feel inside, that misalignment that we know, but we can't articulate because if we said it, it would break the rules of that social dynamic, of the patting on the back, that this is the way it has to be because we need the things that we need and we must avoid the things that we must avoid. And that is what creates the overconsumption and the never-ending pursuit of the next thing, which is constantly trying to deny or avoid that dullness, that hollowness, that lack of alignment. And so I knew right after that I couldn't do fake meetings anymore. Again, it didn't have to do with the content on a slide. It did have to do with that and so much more, which was to pretend that what I was doing in that moment was truthful. Not a representation of the truth in the company, but truthful to my existence as a being with a heart and a soul that now I'm completely and fully aware of and connected to all the time, that I cannot repress, I cannot deny, I cannot pretend that they are not there as my full experience of a living, breathing human being on this earth. And so that was, there was a lot of fear around that, because the conundrum that we face is if we tap into the truth and we get fully aligned and we get quiet and we listen, then the biggest blocker to ever getting closer to a life of peace and harmony and alignment and purpose is all the stories of why we can't not do what we're doing to quote unquote survive. And survive is often the word that comes up regardless if you're making 25,000, 250,000, 2 million. The concept of survival is always going to be the same, because the concept of survival is tied to the dullness, the hollowness, the misalignment of purpose. And I knew that I no longer had a choice. That's what it came down to, clean and simple, is I didn't have a choice. Previously, I could choose to pretend and to mask over it and to say the things that we all say to keep the game going. And I could not do that. And the blessing of that is my experience was I didn't have a choice but to surrender to a greater experience that was happening. And for me, that really looked like a lot of additional time in nature. I would wake up every morning automatically at 3:30, not because I tried. It just happened. And I would meditate for 1 to 3 hours, depending on the day. And I would just sit in this expansive energy. I wasn't meditating trying to get any secondary benefit. I wasn't meditating for less stress or peace or any of the things that sometimes people use as desires. Meditation was done for the point of meditation. It is sitting in this energy field of the expansiveness of the universe and simply being that which is the truth of what I am and what you are. And as you sit in that truth, all this experience of story and life, it starts to recalibrate on its own. It's doing it on its own. So, I don't have to have 8 degrees, and I don't have to go to every yogi in the Himalayas, and I don't have to sign up for every $2,000 retreat weekend to meditate. I might do all of those things. I might be doing none of them, but I don't have to do anything to have a certain level of knowledge or experience. It gives me the right to simply be in alignment and fully at peace with what's happening right here, right now. And I kind of jokingly say to people, I'm like, if you can do nothing, everything will happen. A lot happens when you start to do nothing. Nothing in the sense that there's no games, there's no stories, there's no chasing and pursuing around desires. If you can get to that knowingness of nothingness, everything will start to happen, as it always has been capable of. And I always say, if you want to trust the universe, the first thing you have to do is you have to give it a chance to be trusted. In all these games that we play and all of the structures and all the stories, it's never giving the universe a chance, because the universe is already working. It's like if you think about flowing water, like if you don't touch it, it's moving perfectly. And if you think about every manipulation as like a stone or a tree that falls into the river, that's like, I'm just going to try to get it to go this way. I'm going to try to direct it in such a manner. Every time you're doing that, ultimately the water's still going to go directionally where it needs to go, because you're actually, in fact, not controlling the universe. But the experience of chaos and friction and the nonsense, as I like to say often, it increases every time that you try to block the natural flow, because you think, you feel your desires, your small story is that it should be a certain way. And again, ultimately, whether it's in this lifetime or, 10,000 more, the universe will continue to unfold perfectly, as it always does and always has. Your desire to want to manipulate it and control it is perfect. Lifetime spent trying to control it is perfect. There's nothing that is not perfect. What I'm saying is that in this moment of this perfection, if you happen to be listening to this video in this particular lifetime, and I'm sharing this story, there is a moment of perfection too, where you have the invitation to experience and accept that there could be, and there is, something more in the experience of true surrender to the universe. So I had to relearn everything. I had to relearn my passions. I spent a lot more time in nature. I had the experience you hear of often, where one morning, it was like day 2 or day 3. So I wake up at 3:30 in the morning. I don't know what's going to happen in these meditative experiences, but I am going to sit there for 1 to 3 hours. And then I would say, generally speaking, very little to no thinking, and just a very ever expanding, rapidly expanding center of energy, perception of energy that I understood intrinsically as myself. And also I could feel my body changing. I could feel my brain in particular changing, like literally feeling like my brain was rewiring. I would come out of these meditative experiences and just like, wow. And with that, when I would come out of these meditative experiences, the line between a meditative experience and what I would have said was meditating, not meditating, it started to blur. And so when I would finish doing a formal sit, once that was over, the way that I could perceive everything else was very much heightened. And you hear these stories, and my experience, especially during that first period of time, was very much like that. And I remember after the second day being home finally in my house, and I would meditate, and then I would wait for the sun to come up and go outside, and it'd be this colossal moment, this unbelievable moment when the the sun would slowly rise over the horizon. Never noticed it in my life in this way. And then as the sun would come up and I could start to see everything in nature, tears would just stream down my face. Just crying. And the crying was an overwhelm of just how beautiful the world was in this experiences. And it was also like a sadness, like how many years did maybe I miss this? Like a little bit of guilt at that point in time. Like, wow, how many years have I been surrounded by this miracle that I never chose to fully be part of? And then that's that dullness, that hollowness that we're talking about. It's like living in that energy of that misalignment. It shuts off all the miracles in lots of ways. Like what is constantly a miraculous experience, the dullness is holistic to all of it. It's not just one part, it's a whole experience. So I could see all these miracles in nature and the colors, and I could feel things and smell things, and I'd cry. And I definitely had friends and people knowing something was up, for sure. And all I can say at that point in time was that I was just taking some time away. I didn't know what else to say. Just taking some time off. I was just, call it a health kick, call it time alone. I'm reading. I'm reading more. I'm spending time alone. I'm doing some contemplative stuff. And it was like, as long as I wanted to come back and play my old role and read the script in the same way and give and receive the cookies in the same way, and then they were always going to be there, and they were excited and ready for me to return. And it was clear to me that if that was not going to continue in the same way, that I was not going to be able to function in the same way. And so, in the beginning, I didn't have any overtly spiritual friends, or like I said, wasn't part of a spiritual community. And so it took me a couple of months, but as I kept having these experiences day after day, and it was changing everything about how I was experiencing the world, it only took me, I'd say 3 to 5 days of researching and reading to say, okay, 100%, this is what they would call a spiritual awakening. And so once I knew that, then the next thing was that the sea is so vast of spiritual material that's out there. So if you have not been on an overtly spiritual path, and you were not raised in a lineage that you felt connected to, and you didn't surround yourself with friends of any particular knowledge of the universe, then once you decide to put yourself out there and explore, the sea is so vast. And in retrospect, I can see that there's all these beautiful practices and paths that have the same innate truths. But in the beginning, you can't necessarily know that or see that, and you feel like you've got to pick something. And it was a bit overwhelming, the number of podcasts and the things you could sign up for and the trips you could do, and good and bad, and all the things. But I've always been very blessed to have a clear understanding that the spiritual path is different religion, in that these are all direct experiences. This is not anyone telling me what it is. This is me connecting with innate wisdom in my own heart, which is the heart of the universe, and that these truths are pervasive and universal across all paths, but not because someone told me, not because there's a book or a course or a trip, because I am that truth. My existence is that truth. And with that as my guiding light, if you will, it allows you to not feel like you need to be proselytized by any one person or any one path. And when you don't feel like you have to protect yourself from that because you know what you are and you know what you hold, then you get to experience all as a beautiful tapestry. You get to appreciate everyone's experiences and paths and offerings and learnings and all the differences. And that's part of how the field of unconditional love can be. As long as you know what you are, As long as you know that you are love, then you can love everything and everyone unconditionally. That's a whole nother talk at a different time. But I had to really understand and know my sleeping patterns, my eating patterns, my social networks, my free time. It was much easier to find my joy, though. I could tap into this feeling of bliss and contentment and peace at any time. And I can tell you in this moment right now, it's happening, where I can just close my eyes and energetically, I have no doubt that every cell in my body, my total existence, is as unconditional love. Not because I'm telling myself that. There's no mantra I'm telling myself. It's just the truth of my existence. And so throughout the day, throughout the week, in stressful moments or situations, I realized from that point forward, I've always been able to immediately come back into that truth alignment of my body, heart, soul, spirit, mind, all of that in unison, no division. And that being a pervasive, ongoing, abiding experience. So you might have these peak moments where, you may never always experience those again. And your desire to grasp after that can be a big trap. We'll talk about that more later. But the abiding piece for me is the truth of the unison of all these pieces as just love, nothing else. And it is a shared experience across people at various levels and abiding experiences of awakening. And they might use the word all is one. They might say all is peace, all is love. But it's, I haven't met anyone yet who's had this experience that says all is chaos. Unless they're saying all is chaos and the perfection of the universe, and that is love. After awakening, there's this really interesting interplay between you rediscovering who and what you are and what does and doesn't make you happy in your alignment, and at the same time completely starting to put your guard down, your previous guards and protections, because once you realize that in fact there is a perfection and a pattern and you are it, you don't have to pretend anymore that you can be hurt or suffer in the same ways that you did. It doesn't mean you're special. It doesn't mean that bad things won't happen to you. It doesn't mean that you won't suffer physical pain. All those things will happen in every human experience, because that is the nature of what a human experience is about. The way that you perceive that experience completely shifts. And so pain is an experience. Pain is a master teacher. Suffering is a master teacher. The story around your small self having to protect itself against that is an untruth. Everything suddenly can be a teacher and a gift in the path. And ultimately knowing that you can't be hurt because you aren't actually this small spirit in a small human body. Once you fully embrace that as your life, it can really open you up to, that's where the abiding peace comes from. That's where the abiding knowingness of the truth of the love comes from. So it's not a specialness. It's not that nothing can happen to me. It's that everything that happens to me is a blessing and a gift as part of this incarnation for my soul to develop and mature and to better know itself and to better connect with all life. So I think that's about it for this time. I think just to kind of summarize some of the things that we've been talking about, the key here really is that there is a knowingness in your soul, in your heart, that has nothing to do with your mind. That knowingness, that innate knowingness, actually precedes your mental capabilities and capacities. You may not think that you experience it that way right now if you're primarily operating in your mind. The truth is that there is a perfection to everything that's happening. And that perfection is driven through your intuition and your heart and your soul. Your mind is a wonderful gift and a tool. Your ego is a tool and a wonderful gift to refine how that unfolding happens and to protect you from immediate dangers. But the balance between those things is completely shifted, where many people experience they're living in their mind and they're creating their reality from their mind, and that they are in control of their environment and their situations of their life. And that could not be further from the truth. And living in that illusion of control is what creates the grasping. It's what creates the behaviors that we know are not in alignment, which creates the disconnection within ourselves, which creates all the stats that I won't bore you with because I know that you already know them, in relation to the most unhealthy parts of modern society: the suicide, the drug abuse, the violence. All of that comes from pretending that we are controlling what's happening. And it is the resistance to relaxing in truth and surrendering to the greater perfection that's around us at every moment, all the time. So it's an invitation to believe that you can believe something before you experience it. Once you experience something, you don't have to believe anything. And a belief is just another form of story. But to get there, you might have to believe that you can believe that there is something greater, and that there is a way to live and experience life that is not in conflict, that's not throwing stones and logs in the river to try to manipulate it a certain way, although inevitably it will always flow the way and the speed and the direction that it is meant to. And the abiding peace, the unconditional love, comes from knowing that you cannot be hurt as an individual being. There's no us against them, because there is, in fact, no them. Once you get out of your smaller identity, then all of the interplay of the universe, all the polarity of the dark and the light, and the heavy and the light, and the happiness and the sadness, and the pain and the joy, you realize that you're all of those things. So to pretend that you as a small ego could be hurt by any one of those things and destroyed, you start to realize that that's quite a silly game, and can be a sad way to spend your life. So that's our talk about awakening for today. And I will try to describe in my next chat with you kind of life after awakening, like what it actually meant for me pragmatically in terms of the next year of my life, what happened after that. But thank you for listening. And I just try to speak from my heart in these, and whoever hears them, and they receive them in the way they receive them. So thank you for existing and happening to be here at this time, in this way, in this moment, and receiving this however you're receiving it. But I love you, and I'm grateful to share and play in this experience we call life. So thank you.